Hey y'all, today I'm going to be sharing 5 dinner ideas. These were all really simple to make and they all cooked up pretty quick, which is always nice. And 4 out of these 5 dinners were just me throwing together a meal using what I already had on hand because we've been stuck at home a lot this month because of the snow and ice. I'm sure a lot of y'all can relate, but I am excited to share these recipes, so let's jump on into it. So, first up, I'm going to be making some California burritos for the first time. So I've got over a pound of some bottom round steaks. I think I got that for a really great price. You can also use flank or skirt steak for this recipe, but this one was definitely the most budget friendly. So here I am making the marinade for it. It's 2/3 a cup of soy sauce, a third cup of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of some fresh lime juice. I did mince up some fresh garlic. I'm also going to throw in just a small handful of some fresh cilantro. And then lastly, I'm going to add in a half a teaspoon each of some sea salt and black pepper. So I'm just going to give that a really good mix. And then I'm going to get all of that steak added on in there. I like to flip it around on both sides just to make sure it's really well covered. And then I'll just cover it with some cling wrap and let it sit in the fridge anywhere from an hour to 12 hours. I did about 2 hours. But yeah, this is that one meal that I actually got to go to the store for. It's not very often that I have cilantro and steak laying around my house. So I've also been planning on making this for quite a while. I like to leave a running note in my phone for meal ideas when I see something that sounds good, and then I just pull it out when I want it. But yeah, that's in the fridge marinating, and I'm also going to make some homemade queso. So I have a half a pound of sliced pepper jack cheese and a half a pound of some white American cheese. I got both of those cut at the Kroger Deli, and I'm just going to be cooking this in my crock pot. I whipped out my smallest crock pot, perfect for dips and stuff like this. I did spray it with some Pam cooking spray first, and then I'm just taking each slice one by one, tearing it and throwing it in the bottom. You'll also need a 4-ounce can of these chopped green chilies and also a 12-ounce can of evaporated milk. Pouring all of that in there, and then lastly, a teaspoon of cumin. So I'm just going to give that a quick mix, basically just trying to get that milk down into the bottom so that cheese doesn't like burn to the bottom. Now I'm just going to get this covered up, and I let mine cook on low for about an hour and a half. So now it is dinner time, and I'm just going to quickly grill up these steaks. You absolutely do not have to grill these, of course. You can use any cooking method that you want to, but like I said in my last video, I recently got a Traeger, and I just really want to learn everything there is to know about it. I want to get comfortable with it, so I'm just trying to use it as often as I can. But it was extremely cold when I was doing this. As you can see, I'm wearing a winter coat, but when I am determined to learn something, I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to wait around. But yeah, every time that I would open that lid, the heat would drop so fast. So I ended up cooking those for about 3 minutes per side. They are real, well, not really thin, but they're pretty thin. I would have done 2 minutes, but like I said, because of that temperature dropping, I just did 3, and they cooked up so perfectly. So I brought those inside to rest, and now I'm just heating up some burrito-sized tortillas. Just did, a little bit of time on each side. I could have done it longer, but at that point I was miserable out there. So now we're back in. The steak has rested. You always want to let your steak rest for at least 5 minutes. But I'm just cutting it against the grain, and you can just tell by the way it's kind of flopping when I pick it up with a fork that it is perfectly cooked. These came out super tender and so flavorful. I absolutely love that little bit of smokiness that came from the grill, and I think that this is a really good amount of steak for the price that I paid, and there's so many different things that you can do with this. I'm really glad that I gave that cut of meat a try. I would definitely repurchase. But now I'm going to start assembling the burritos. So to be a California burrito, you start with a layer of fries. So I did deep fry some Rally's brand of fries. Then I topped it with a good amount of that sliced steak. I did some shredded cheese and sour cream and some of my homemade guacamole. And then I rolled it up. I always have a little bit of trouble with this just because I like to overstuff my burritos. So they're not the prettiest, but these were really good. My only complaint is that marinade for the steak was a little bit too salty. I would definitely use low sodium next time. Other than that, super good. The queso also turned out tasty, but it wasn't quite what I was expecting. It wasn't really restaurant style like I had hoped, so I do think that I'll keep looking for other recipes for queso. I have never cooked with chorizo before, so this was a first for me. I've had this in my freezer for a while and I wasn't too sure what to do with it, but I came across a recipe on Pinterest for a chorizo sausage gravy and I just knew that that would be so good. So I figured we'll do breakfast for dinner. We haven't done that in a while and it's always a hit. So I started off by removing that chorizo from the casing and I just broke it up, cooked it down, and once it was fully cooked through, I added in 3 tablespoons of just some plain all-purpose flour, and I'm just going to stir that around, let that coat the sausage, and I let that cook for, I'd say 3 to 4 minutes. I wanted to really make sure that I cooked out that flour taste, and then I'm going to add in 2 cups of milk. Now, the recipe did call for whole milk, but it's very rare that I buy that, but I always have 2% in the fridge, so that's what I went with, and it worked perfectly. And I cooked this on a medium heat the whole time, and it took no time at all for that to start thickening up and changing into this beautiful color. I seasoned it to taste with some salt and pepper, and then I just did a small dash of some smoked paprika, and that was it. It cooked up so insanely fast. I had some Mary B's frozen biscuits in my freezer, so that's what I'm using for the biscuits. Those are my favorite when I'm not using homemade. I added a little sprinkle of dried parsley on top of that gravy, and I served this with some over easy eggs. I love me a good runny yolk, and I had these frozen hash brown patties in the freezer, so cooked those up, and this whole meal was so good. We loved this chorizo gravy, but it did have a kick to it. It was honestly a bit too spicy for us, but I'm still thankful for trying this out. It's definitely going to be a repeat in our house. I just need to find some milder chorizo. Up next, I'm going to roast some broccoli and cherry tomatoes together as a side to go with some barbecue chicken. So both the broccoli and tomatoes needed to be used up. I typically wouldn't roast these 2 things together, but I'm so glad that I did. I absolutely love how these turned out. So I, of course, washed them first. I added them to a small bowl, and I just drizzled them with some olive oil, seasoned them with a touch of garlic salt, and I did a small splash of some balsamic vinegar. That is something that I rarely use, but every time I do, I'm just so impressed with the flavor that it adds. I need to start using that in more stuff. But yeah, I just simply tossed that together for a little bit and dumped it out on a parchment lined cookie sheet and got that spread out. That will roast at 425, anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. Just going to scoot that to the side until the oven is preheated. I'm also going to make some of this roasted chicken rice as a side. I've had that in my pantry for a bit. It was honestly a little bit past expiration, but it was fine. I also had this green bell pepper in my fridge that I had forgot about. I was going to use it in my homemade spaghetti sauce recipe from my last video, but I just forgot, so I definitely wanted to get that used up. I figured it would work well with this rice, and it absolutely did. So I started by heating up a couple tablespoons of olive oil in my pan. I added in that chopped bell pepper and I just sauteed that around. I'd say anywhere from 5 to 6 minutes so that it could start to get tender. Then I added in the amount of water that that package of rice called for. Dumped in the rice, gave it a really good stir, and I just waited for this to come up to a boil. Once it reached that, I covered it with a lid, turned it down to a simmer, and that needs to cook anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes. So now onto the barbecue chicken. This is 2 chicken breasts that I had. I sliced them in half, so now we have 4 portions, and now I'm going to make this seasoning blend. So all that is a half a tablespoon of brown sugar, a half a teaspoon of chili powder, paprika, and salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder. I actually got the recipe for this barbecue chicken from a Pioneer Woman cookbook. She calls it barbecue glazed chicken, and she said that she serves it at her restaurant. I could not find the recipe on Pinterest, so I can't link it, but I will link the cookbook that I got it from. Use half of that seasoning to cover one side of the chicken. I got my largest cast iron skillet out and I melted down a tablespoon of butter and heated up a tablespoon of olive oil with it. Once it was nice and hot and that skillet was ready, I dropped my chicken in, seasoning side down. And now I'm just going to use the other half of that seasoning and get the other side covered as evenly as I can. If you don't have a skillet this size, you will probably want to do this in batches so that you're not overcrowding the pan. But yeah, I let that first side cook for about 5 minutes and then I got them flipped over. And then you want to add some barbecue sauce to the top. I'm just doing some Sweet Baby Ray's. That's a classic. And I'm just going to take the back of my fork, get that spread out better. And it should cook for at least 3 to 4 more minutes. It should be done at that point. I always use a meat thermometer to help me. But this recipe took me back. Barbecue chicken was one of my favorite childhood meals. It's something I cooked a lot when I first got into cooking, and it's just been so long. And it's so true when they say that the most simplest things are always the best. This came out so good. I love how the veggies turned out, love how the rice turned out. Everything was just super flavorful. I loved how colorful it was. As you can see, I did top the chicken with a little dried parsley just to make it a little extra fancy. And I did cut into it for y'all just to show you how juicy that chicken was. It was cooked so perfectly. This night was my daughter's request. Her current favorite food is potato soup, and she's got to have her bacon on top. So I really love cooking it in the oven. I just put it on a grease cookie sheet, pop it in a cold oven, crank it up to 400 for about 25 minutes. So I have russet potatoes here that I have washed, peeled, and cubed. I had about a half a bag left, so that's what I'm using. And I'm actually doing a different recipe than I typically do. I didn't even follow a recipe. I just winged it. I've been trying out many different versions here lately. So I started by melting down a couple tablespoons of butter in my big soup pot. I added a big spoonful of minced garlic just from the jar. So we got a nice garlic butter going on. And now I'm just adding in all of those potatoes. I'm going to season these with some onion powder, or you can add an actual onion if you're into that. I'm adding in some water and some of this chicken bouillon powder. I always like to cook my potatoes in chicken broth when I'm making potato soup. That's just non-negotiable. I actually did not have any chicken broth, so I was really thankful when I came across that in the back of my spice cabinet because I didn't even know that I had it. But I'm going to let that come up to a boil. At the same time, my bacon was done. As you can see, it is perfectly crispy. It looks absolutely perfect. That's why I love the oven method. It's just perfect every single time. But once those start boiling, I like to let those cook for, I'd say, about 15 minutes. You want them fork tender. And while those are cooking, I am going to shred that block of sharp cheddar cheese. And then this is not something that I typically do. I did it one time when I was not filming me making this potato soup. I just made it on a random day for lunch when Riley asked for it. And I really liked this method. I know a lot of people do it, but it's newer to me. But yeah, I mashed about half of those potatoes, and I feel like it helps thicken up the potato soup and just gives it a nice texture overall. I'm seasoning it with some regular salt and some Lawry's seasoned salt and lots of black pepper. We like a lot of pepper in our potato soup. I'm going to get that mixed in, and at this point, I'm going to turn the heat down to low. I added in a good splash of some heavy cream, and I added in all of that cheese that I just shredded. So that's 2 cups of sharp cheddar. Obviously, you can add as little or as much as you want, but that's the right amount for us. And that's all there is to it. Really fast to make, and it is just the perfect, like, wintertime, stuck in the house type of meal. We always love it, no matter what version or recipe I make. I do like it to be a little bit thicker than this, but as always, it will thicken as it cools. Now, we have been on a big sandwich kick here lately, and what goes better with soup than a sandwich? So basically, I just toasted up some light bread, and I was actually out of mayonnaise on this day. So I'm just using some homemade ranch that I had made up in the fridge. Paired really well with what I'm doing. This is the Oscar Mayer smoked turkey. I've really been loving that specific one lately. I'm using some of that bacon that I just cooked up, so it had 2 purposes. I added a slice of sharp cheddar and some lettuce, and that is it. I cut it in half diagonally, just to make it kind of look nicer, give you a better look look at it, but super, super simple, but it really hit the spot. So we always top our potato soup with some extra cheese, extra pepper. Of course, we've got that crumbled bacon on top, and I really like to add some dried chives to it. It was absolutely delicious, as always. And, I hope y'all don't mind me sharing potato soup recipes as often as I have here lately. I try not to repeat stuff too much, but obviously at the end of the day, my kids are going to come first, and I love Riley's love for potato soup, and I appreciate her helping me with the meal plan. Lastly, I'm going to throw together some cheesy beef and shells, which is basically just a homemade version of hamburger helper. It tastes pretty identical, but it's definitely more creamy and cheesy, just a little bit better quality. So I started by throwing a pound of ground beef into my Dutch oven. So I'm just getting that chopped up. When it was about halfway cooked through, I went ahead and seasoned that meat with some onion powder, salt, and black pepper. And then I'm just going to finish cooking off that meat. If you have a lot of excess grease, definitely drain it. And then the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. I did not have enough. I had maybe a tablespoon left in this little tube. It is what it is. What can you do? I wish I had more, but it worked. We can still go on with the recipe. I also added in a teaspoon each of paprika, garlic powder, and Italian seasoning. So I'm just stirring that around, letting that coat the meat. Next, I'm just going to measure out 2 cups of some beef broth. You want a lot of liquid during this step because that is what we are going to cook the pasta in. So you definitely need enough to cover it. I'm also doing 1 cup of heavy cream, and I'm going to do several dashes of Worcestershire sauce. I always add in extra than what a recipe calls for because we just really love the taste of that and what it does to a dish. And I'm just going to use that same measuring cup to measure out 2 cups of some shell pasta. So getting that stirred in, and once it starts boiling, I'm just going to let that cook uncovered about 13 minutes. Always test it, of course. But while that was cooking, I did cube up 8 ounces of Velveeta cheese. So got that tossed in there. I added just a little bit of salt and pepper to taste, and then I just stirred that until that cheese was melted. Very fast meal to make, and just look at how cheesy that is. If you haven't noticed, we are a big cheese loving family. My kids tore this up. There wasn't a drop left over, so that's always a good feeling. And I just paired this with a simple side salad since I had all the ingredients. So just lettuce, tomato, croutons, my homemade ranch with some pepper dusted over the top. Very, very simple. But that is all I got for y'all in today's video. I hope this gave you some good dinner inspiration. And as always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you in my next one.